Okay, so we've got it recording. So before we start taking the questions, how are things and is there anything you want to share?
Uh, everything's good. I've got the blessing of the service of cleaning up the cow sheds in the morning now. It's good exercise for me. I'm liking it very much. Bhai Krishna was doing it while he was here, and so I volunteered for it recently. So it takes me about an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half at most. I clean up all their dung and fix their beds and so forth, and feed them and so forth. So that's been real nice. Added to my morning program. About 7:30 in the morning. About 8 o'clock in the morning, I start that. After rising at about 4 and chanting till 7:30, and then I just clue you in on my schedule. Then I have a little breakfast, and then I start the lila-seva and so forth. So, but this morning on Sundays, then Gurnishta and Ranya do that, so that I give more attention to all of you here, prepare for this session. So good to be with you. And otherwise, still working on my book, Circle of Friends. It's going well. I'm going now over all the editing that's been done. And approving or commenting and so forth. So making good progress. So let's go ahead and take the questions.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was sweet. So right now there's 6 questions.
Okay.
There could be more. So Padmanabha Swami has a question, but I don't think he's here right now, and he emailed me the question. So I'm gonna put, oh wait, that's not, I was going to copy and paste it into the chat because it's kind of long, but let me just try to do that and then I'll read it, or you could read it. Yeah, it's not letting me paste it. So I'll just read it. So he says, I have a question regarding how to conduct myself internally in my daily worship of my Ishtadevata, especially in connection to how their activities take place in the dynamic of their daily leelas. For example, we generally put Radha Krishna or Gaur Gadadhar to sleep at night, but we know that actually neither of them go to sleep, but they go out all night for Rasa Leela or Rasa Sankirtan respectively. The same criterion applies to one's guru, who will join them in their nightly pastimes in most cases. Another example would be when our Istadevata is awakened, bathed, dressed in the context of Archan. But we also know that in the Leela of Radha Krishna, for example, they awaken in the Kunj, but they go to their respective homes after that, take rest, and only are bathed and dressed in their respective homes. One more point would be regarding some of their clothes, especially in Gora Leela, since it is Nityanava Dweep. Sri Gadadhar wears white cloth and not red like in Boma Leela, or in the case of one's guru, he may be a sannyasi here, but in Nityanava Dweep, he is a Brahmin boy wearing white. So how to meditate on all these things properly in such a way that our worship may foster our service there? It's kind of a long question.
Yeah, I understand the question.
Okay.
One way of approaching the answer is to make a point that I have made repeatedly on other occasions, and that is that Archan is one of the principal angas or limbs of bhakti. But with regard to the Gaudiya Sampradaya, the main limbs, and these are the ones that are emphasized in the Bhagavatam itself, which is our main book, are Shravanam, hearing, Kirtanam, chanting, and Smaranam. And I often say, and we added that half Archanam. And I mean, what I mean by that is in the Vaidhi Marg Sampradayas, like the Ramanuja Sampradaya or the Madhva Sampradaya, for example, where the goal is to attain Vaikuntha and reverential love of God, Archan is very prominent. For example, in the Madhva Sampradaya in Udupi, the main center for the Madhva Sampradaya, their Udupi Krishna is the deity. It's said to have been the deity of Rukmini in Dwarka that was just somehow came into the hands of Madhva, and he established the worship. So the worship begins in the morning, and the puja with bathing and decorating and all that shringar goes up until midday. So it's a major focus. It's very central, the anga of Archan. And in the context of Archan, there's a measure of reverence. I was once giving a class here, and there was a visiting person who was taking interest, and I was speaking about love and intimacy, which is our ideal. And then he said, well, why are you bowing down before this, the deities here, if that's your ideal? So the point being that with Archan, there is some measure of reverence in comparison to the intimacy of the Braj Lila, where the service, if you will, of Krishna's friends, Krishna's mother, the gopis, doesn't always look like service. Does it look like service when Mother Yasoda is chastising her son? When Sridham is wrestling him to the ground and defeating him in a match? It doesn't look like service. So you have to look deeply underneath and understand the theology and the philosophy, how there is this realm of intimacy where it is based on service, but it expresses itself in intimacy in these forms of Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, and so forth. So, so there's a difference between Archan and Archan Seva and lila-seva, let's say. And with regard to the former, Archan, deity worship, Seva puja, yeah, there's an element of reverence that's there, and the way the puja, Seva puja is constructed doesn't entirely correspond with the meditative internal seva, lila-seva, that advanced devotees are preoccupied with. Therefore, we often see that very advanced devotees retire into nirjan bhajan, and they're worshiping internally and doing lila-seva within in meditation without participating in the Archan marg. So the question is more or less how to bring those kind of two together, so to speak. And Maharaj has given the example of, well, we put the deities to rest at night, but Krishna stays up all night. So how are we going to put these two things together? And there is the possibility of doing that to some extent conceptually, which is kind of what Maharaj is asking. To go beyond that for a moment, however, there is also bhava seva to the deity, where, excuse me, in the bhav of Braj, of the Braj Prem, of Sakya or Madhurya, then the ordinary rules, if you will, that pertain to Archan may be overstepped out of bhava. So these are special cases, and we see some examples of this, excuse me, in how great associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nitya-siddhas sometimes argue with the deity. The famous story of Sanatana Goswami, who had Madan Mohan perched in a tree, and was worshiping him with unleavened bread with no salt. And the deity said to him one day, could you at least supply some salt? And he said, well, first you ask for salt, then you're going to want ghee, then you're going to want this, that. And I'm a poor sadhu, you know, if you're going to live with me, you have to accept what I have, and so forth. So these are extraordinary types of dealings with the Archer Vigraha rising out of bhava that transcend then the ordinary rules, if you will, procedures by which we will engage in archan. So there's some conflict between the two that can be overridden by actually attaining bhava. But Mars is asking something prior to that, some conceptual kind of orientation. And I would say that in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there has been an effort in some instances, in some lineages, to try to better connect the two by having artiks at different times that correspond. I think Prabhupada originally wanted 7 or 8 artiks a day. So a Mangal artik, which would be correspond with waking Radha and Krishna early in the morning. And then he had like a 7 o'clock in the morning artik, which would more correspond with Krishna's second rising in the morning. He wakes in the kunja, and then he has to get home before the sun comes up fully, and he's found out that he's been out all night. He gets home in time to close his eyes and rest for a few minutes, only to be woken by Balaram's horn and the commotion of his friends, you know, stampeding, so to speak, with their cows on in the courtyard. Uttaya Krishna, wake up Krishna, and so forth. So that's the second waking. So Prabhupada did that with the 7 o'clock arti, and then he had a midday, and then he had a mid-afternoon, and he even had a changing of the dress of the deities in the morning and again in the afternoon, if possible, in some temples. So that was, let's say, it's 1, 2, 3, that's 4 artiks. Then he had a 5th artik in the evening at about 7. Then he had another one. So I guess he arranged 6 artiks throughout the day, and that would still leave 2 periods. But anyway, he made some effort to extend it in that way, and other temples may have done something similar or along those lines of trying to bring the two together, if you will. But I think that besides adjusting deity worship per se, mentally, conceptually, one can pick up where the deity worship officially leaves off, so to speak. So if you put the deities to rest at, let's say, 8 o'clock at night or something like that, the sun has gone down, and that's your seva. Well, Krishna does go to sleep. He is put to bed at that time. He does lock the door behind him as he goes in. Yes, then he gets up and he goes back out. So we're not going to go back in and wake Krishna up at 8:30 and so forth. But typically, when the deity is put to rest at night, some prasad, payasam, like sweet rice, is left out. So the implication of that is that he's going to get up. And of course, rather than getting up in Lila and tasting sweet rice, he goes out and rendezvous with the gopis and so forth. So that's where you have to pick up conceptually, meditatively and so forth. When you can go to sleep yourself and stay awake even while you're asleep, contemplating the Lila. Or if you can't do that, at least you can think along those lines. I'm putting the Krishna to rest. He'll get up later on, and depending upon if I'm in Madhurya Rasa, I want to participate. If I'm in Sakya Rasa as a Narmasak, there may be some opportunity to participate at his behest, and I'll be there. There are examples of this. in the literature of the Goswamis. So I think you have to combine together the two, extend the archan conceptually to include the entirety of Krishna's day, even where it leaves off. You wake up to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the morning. Maharaj was saying, but there's two wakings to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu too. I mean, depends on who which acharya is writing about it. They're not all the same. So some find him waking in the gardens of Srivas Thakur's compound, having fallen asleep, and then going home. And then the associates come again to his home and again wake him up, where others have him going home after staying out all night and taking some rest, and then a second, then awaking within his home a little later on, and so forth. So you have to, those who are involved, like Maharaj is thinking about this, look at the different lila narratives of great devotees and find what works best for oneself conceptually. As far as details like guru seva, let's say, I think Maharaj is giving an example. His guru is a sannyasi, so he's wearing a saffron colored cloth, but in the Gaur Lila, then he's a Brahmin boy with white cloth and so forth. So yeah, if you're gonna, you can, it shouldn't be so hard to change the color in your meditative conceptualization of Gaur Lila. I think that Maharaj mentioned that Gadadhara wears white in a Lila, but here we may dress him in different colors like red and so on and so forth. So I mean these are different expressions of the reality of Krishna and Radha and Krishna or Gaur Gadadhar in different circumstances. So in different situations we worship them differently. We may find ourselves in one situation, and then we may find ourselves in another situation. We find ourselves at a temple worshiping Gaur Gadadhar, and Gadadhar is dressed in red. We don't say he should be in white, because no, in this particular expression here, we accept him in this way. He's being worshipped in this way, and this is to promote ultimately entering into the Leela. We're okay, and he may be dressed in white, and one can meditate accordingly. So I'm giving a kind of a broad answer. It's something that most devotees are not able to really participate in, digest, and so forth. It's a little beyond them. Something maybe Maharaj can speak with me more personally about, and I can help him with a little back and forth to refine his way of thinking about it. But I hope that helps.
Yeah, he'll definitely listen to the recording. And then there's a question from Radharani and Anandi. I just have to go up to, okay. So the question is, Radharani, I wrote it down wrong. That makes sense. Guru Maharaj, you spoke so beautifully about Lord Gadadhar, and I'd love to hear about him. Therefore, I would like to ask about how is it that Lord Gadadhar and also Radha, Lalita, wait, let me say that again. Therefore, I would like to ask how it is that Lord Gadadhar is also Radha, Lalita, and Visakha. So that's the one, so there's two questions, but that's her question.
Well, I think that in Kavi Karnapur's Govardhana-tattva, where he tries to identify eternal associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Leela, Gaur Leela, with associates of Radha and Krishna in the Braja Leela, he identifies Gadadhara with Radha. And in this, he follows the lead of Swarup Damodar Goswami, who was the secretary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri. And he says there, I believe, that Gadadhar is Radha of Gaur Leela and Lalita. In other places, later acharyas and some contemporaries of the time of Kavi Karnapur identified Swarup Damodar with Lalita. Later, and Kavi Karnapur identified Swarup Damodar with Visakha. So the point here, in one sense, with regard to works like Kavi Karnapur, of which there are a number of other works, probably the most famous of them was the later work of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that parallels what Kavi Karnapur has done. Again, identifying the members of Gaur Leela with members of Krishna Leela. And he does it similarly, but there are some differences. There are other texts as well. Like in my book, I'm writing about the Dwadasa Gopals. Who are they in Krishna Leela? Who are they in Gaur Leela? And there's like half a dozen or more different books with different opinions. Some of them agree wholeheartedly for the most part, but then there are some exceptions, differences, and so forth. So these are I want to say spiritual conjectures on the part of different devotees, based on things that have been said in other scriptures, based on what other devotees may have said, but based on what the devotees themselves may have said, what may have been observed in them, that gives one rise to make that kind of connection. But they're not always to be seen as absolutes, and therefore even Kavi Karnapur gives different opinions. But with regard to Gadadhar being Radha and Lalita, I don't think he identifies him with Visakha. It's thought that Gadadhar is the Radha of Gaur Leela, but in Navadvip, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is full, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu leaves Navadvip to teach. And when he leaves Navadvip to teach, he teaches by his example. So now he's taken sannyas, now he's a sadhu, right? And so he appears to go through a systematic kind of development of progress. Ultimately, he retires by the force of internal emotion, bhava, from the public life to the private life. And he's in the embrace of Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy, or coaching him to enter into the bhava of Radha, which he ultimately is successful in doing. The last verse of Shikshastakam, as I've said before, Kaviraj Goswami says, these words were spoken. This is the voice of Radha. So he did it. He did it. And that's through that, from the time of Mahaprabhu taking sannyas until he enters into the Radha Bhava, there's much teaching for all of us. Whereas in Navadvip is the goal where we want to enter. So when Mahaprabhu goes deep into the trance in Antya Leela, we follow him, we come out in Navadvip, in the kirtan, in the courtyard of Srivas Thakur, and that kirtan corresponds with Vrindavan and so on and so forth. So in Navadvip, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may go into Radha Bhava, this is now before he's teaching, and I mean he is Krishna, he is Radha and Krishna combined. So there's a systematic teaching in the Madhya Leela how he enters into that, but it doesn't mean that in Navadvip, in that Leela, which is the eternal lila we want to enter into, even in the prakat expression, the manifest lila of Gaur Lila, he may taste Radha Bhava. And to the extent that he does so, the idea is that the Radha Bhava in Gadadhar is given to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Gadadhar accepts the bhava of Lalita, or Anuradha is another name for Lalita, follows Radha. So this is how it's often explained that Gadadhar is Radha, but sometimes he's in the bhava of Lalita, as Mahaprabhu further tastes the Radha bhava. Something like that. Yeah. Hope that helps. Another question?
Yeah, and the second question is, Guru Maharaj, I would like to ask about Lord Govardhan. What is the tattva?
Who's asking?
Anandi, Krishna Das.
Well, Govardhan tattva is a big subject, and there are different ways to look at Govardhan Hill. Basically, what we find in the Bhagavatam is that Krishna himself is identified with the Govardhan Hill. But for that matter, he's identified with the entirety of his Dham, Aradha Bhagavan Brajeshatanayasta Dham Vrindavanam. So the Dham, the abode of Krishna, is non-different from Krishna, like his form is non-different from him. So Govardhan is a prominent feature of the Dham and of the Lila. The devotees moved from Mahavan early on across the Jamuna to come in the vicinity of Govardhan, because Govardhana, Go means cow here, and Vardhana means to nourish, to increase. So it increases, supplies the cows with so much it provides much to nourish them, and it becomes a primary sporting place for Krishna Lila. At the same time that Govardhan is non-different from Krishna, and Govardhan is, for the most part, worshipped as such. For example, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was given a stone from Govardhan, Shila, and he worshipped the stone. At that time, he would put on a necklace of Gunjamala, hold the stone, and he would weep, and that would be the Abhishek, the sacred bath of the deity. Later, he gave the stone to Raghunath Das Goswami, and he gave him the Gunjamala. And Das Goswami said that at that time, I understood that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had given me a place at Govardhan in the Leela. And giving me the Gunjamala implied that he gave me a place at Govardhan in the service of Radha. So he identified the Gunjamala to some extent with Radha and Gopi Bhav in residence at Govardhan. Now he worshipped Govardhan according to the instructions of Sarup Damodar, and he saw Govardhan as Brajendanandan Krishna. He saw Govardhan as non-different from Krishna. So he conceptually worshipped Govardhan as a deity of Krishna. It's common these days within Gaudiya Vaishnavism to worship the deity of Govardhan as a Ragmarg deity representing Krishna and the Gunjamala representing Radha. Put them together. That's fairly common. At the same time, Govardhan is also identified as a servant of Krishna. Radharani says in Venu Gita that Haridas Varya is the best servant of Krishna. And these are all the reasons. He provides this, the caves for resting in, and birds he facilitates who give the song, and it's kirtan, and the flowers and the waterfalls for bathing, and so on and so forth. And all the Jiva Goswami's written in Gopal Champu, I think 64 different items of worship, all provided by Govardhan. So, you do the puja with 64 items and so forth in your home or in the temple. And in the Leela, it's played out in this way. Govardhan is providing all these things daily for Krishna. It's a beautiful idea. And in this perspective, then we look at Govardhan as a devotee. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says Govardhan is identified with Sakyarasa, as far as seeing him as a devotee. He's identified with the friendly mood. Now, how can something be Krishna and be devotee of Krishna at the same time? Well, this is fairly common in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu obviously is Krishna, and he's a devotee of Krishna. Balaram is Vishnu Tattva, but he actually conducts himself more like Shakti Tattva in terms of loving Krishna in Sakyarasa, right? So he's seen by us as both as object of worship in Sakyarasa along with Krishna, but also as ideal example of devotion to Krishna in Sakyarasa, both things. In Rupa Goswami's Lila, Dan Keli Lila. Dan Keli Lila is the Lila where, and there are many versions of this, where Krishna sets up with his friends a toll booth and attempts to tax the gopis from going any further, or ultimately he wants them to pay the price of Radha's love. So it's Narmasakas are involved, and Krishna's and Radha's friends and manjaris, and this is played out in a number of iterations with different details, but the purpose of it is the same. And in Rupa Goswami's drama, Dan Keli Lila, then we find, I think it's Brinda Devi, Gopi, she turns to Govardhan, where it's taking place at Govardhan, and says, just see Govardhan. Govardhan is not like this, a one mount going straight up, but it's long, horizontal, with many peaks. So she says, just see this Govardhan. He's better than Ananta Sesh, which is a manifestation of Balaram, who has many heads, right? So many peaks. And while Vishnu resides on the lap of Ananta Sesh, who protects him like an umbrella with his many heads, Govardhan becomes the lap in which Krishna plays, overseen by so many peaks and so forth. So basically, she says, Govardhan is better than Ananta Sesh. So she's basically identified him with Balaram, who is Ananta Sesh's Vishnu Tattva, expansion of Balaram, and he's in a serving mood. Ekala Ishwar Krishna Sabhriti, for that matter. There's one Ishwar, and everyone else, even all the Vishnu Tattva, are all servants of him. That's the Gaudiya conception. So anyway, Ananta Sesh is a manifestation of Vishnu, but he's always serving Vishnu. So Govardhan is a manifestation of Vishnu. And here he's been likened to Balaram or Ananta Sesh, a better Ananta Sage. He provides not just a place to sit for Krishna, but an entire playground for so many leelas. So we should pray to Govardhan. I mean, he is towering up above all of Braj. So that means he knows all the leelas. He can see all of them. Those within his own lap and beyond. There's nothing, there's, if he's a Narmasaka, we'll see him as a Priya Narmasaka. Therefore, we can say there's no leela that he doesn't know about, he's not aware of. So all that he can really reveal all such leelas. We'll approach him in this way. Oh, Giriraj Govardhan, Namaste Girirajaya Sri Govardhana Namane. For my obeisances, Namaste Giriraj, to the King of Hills. Namaste Girirajaya Sri Govardhana Namane. Your name is Govardhana, who nourishes the cows. Namaste Girirajaya Sri Govardhana Namane. Sesha Klesha Nashaya Paramanandadayane. Sesha Klesha Nashaya. You destroy all the obstacles, all difficulties. Sesha Klesha Nashaya Paramanandadayan, and you give the highest bliss. So I worship you. You are non-different from Bhagavan, and you said at the same time, set an example how to serve Bhagavan, as does Balaram or Anantasage himself, something like that. These are some ways to think about Govardhan. Govardhan Giriraj Ki Jai. Another question?
Yeah, Abai has a question.
Okay.
Haribol Gumrush, can you hear me?
Yes.
Haribol, nice to see you. Exciting to hear about your new program between that and the biking. That's a pretty healthy program you're on over there, sounds like.
Yeah.
So Harlila and I both had a question. She was actually the one that came up with it. She's here as well on another device on the Polish channel here. And we were wondering if you could speak a little about some of the residents of Braj who, when seen through a material lens, could seem like they have the short end of the stick or something. The main example would be the husbands of the gopis, and another one possibly Jatila. We know, of course, that they're not suffering, and everyone there has Krishna at the center of their heart. But just wondering if you could explain their roles in a spiritual lens to help us understand those characters a little more.
Yes, into the prakash, or the window of opportunity that we enter, then there are going to be any number of props and supporting roles and so forth that are all in one sense extensions of that of the bhav into which we've entered, which is central. Now I'm entering into it in for example, in Sakya Bhava in a particular way and so forth. And so in order for that bhava to be experienced, facilitated, there have to be certain arrangements, there have to be certain people, certain so on and so forth. So in one sense, these are extensions of the very bhava of the devotee. Rather than separate people. Do you follow? Who got the short end of the stick, so to speak, as you put it. And that's a bit novel, I think, but probably for most devotees to hear that. But such is the nature of the bhava of a devotee, because the opportunity for a particular bhava comes to us through sadhu sangha, and we pursue it, and that grace, combined with our effort in the form of sadhana, reaches a point wherein the bhakti has cleansed our heart, and we have a desire only to serve Krishna in accordance with that bhava, and then the details of that bhava are coming from the satya sankalpa, the wish, all wishes fulfilled feature of a mukta. In other words, mukta jivas have all their wishes fulfilled because they're all under the influence of the Swarup Shakti, which is only for the pleasure of Krishna. So details of the color of one's dress, where one will reside, and so on and so forth, having heard from the Leela, finding oneself attracted to one sector or another, that these are determined to some extent by the will of the jiva that is tied entirely to the Swarup Shakti that's only for the purpose of serving Krishna, that manifests newer and newer ways to serve him all the time. So one way to look at even your own who your parents be in the Leela can be an extension of your own bhava. They're a sanchari, and your relationship with them is a sanchari bhav that augments your sthayi bhav. So they're a bhava that's part of your own rasa, facilitating it, rather than some independent person who got the short end of the stick, so to speak. This is one way to look at this. Another way, of course, where this kind of thing is more typically spoken about along these lines, where everyone in the Leela is fully satisfied in their particular position. If you want to look at it like that, you can look at it like that. What it may look like from our vantage point of our bhava, or even objectively speaking, Jatila's got the short end here. She's the bad, person, but she's actually supplying something to the Leela that is essential for it to happen. Without her, Radha's mother-in-law, being in opposition to Radha meeting with Krishna, how can there be parkiya? So, you can look at a figure like Jatila. She's playing a particular role like that. Actually, she has full love of Radha and Krishna, but that she is that feature of the Leela and is fully satisfied in that. I don't tend to quite look at it like her as a devotee who has done sadhaka to enter there, and someone's become a Jatila or something, like got the short end. Not like that. But these again are, from my perspective, these are props, so to speak. These are all making the parakiya, possible, aspects of it. So it's all part of the overall bhava that the devotee's experiencing. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
And then Martin has a question. I'm not sure if he put that in the chat. Trying to look. Okay, yeah, he did. So his question is, Pranam Maharaj, Hare Krishna. I am at a very beginning stage of the practice, and I was meditating on how I can be patient with my process of surrender, because sometimes I can be really hard with myself for not being that surrendered. Can you share some advices related to this? Thank you very much.
Well, I think that, the Krishna consciousness or Gaudiya Vaishnavism, spiritual pursuit, is something that shouldn't turn into psychological dysfunction and neurosis of self-loathing, for example, lack of self-esteem or anything like that. I've often said that there are two senses in which the term ego could be used, a psychological sense and a metaphysical sense. So metaphysically speaking, we've identified with matter. And so this misidentification is called ahankar. It was a German philosopher who was interested in Eastern philosophy from a couple centuries back. I forget his name, and he called it the world and the world not. I like that. many Western readers of, I forget his name now, of him, don't understand what he was talking about. But if you're familiar with Eastern philosophy, he's really speaking about ahankar, the world not. Now that's different than your personal psychological ego. And from the point of view of Vedanta, if you have a healthy psychological ego, which is a balanced psychology, if you're in balance, that's sattva. So one who has a balanced psychology or is predominantly influenced by sattva is in a better position to pursue spiritual life, relatively speaking, than someone who is more influenced by tama or rajaguna, which, especially with tamaguna, which would be very, kind of dysfunctional. Now that doesn't mean like within the varnashram you have people who are predominantly influenced by rajas, the military, the politicians, and so forth. You have the tamas, the sudras. It doesn't mean that they're bad or they're not in a position to take advantage of spiritual life. If, according to varnashram, they apply themselves appropriately within the varnashram and engage themselves according to their psychological influence within the gunas, that's sattva. That's sattvic. So the more when it comes to a sattvic perspective, well, the better one is suited to pursue vertical growth. That's kind of like horizontal growth, psychological balance. Bhakti can come to anyone. Doesn't require you be sattvic or even a human being. Could come to an animal. But where she comes to us is one thing, and then from where we have to go is another thing. So if you're already in Sattva-guna, if you're already self-realized, like a jnani, and Bhakti comes to you, well, you're going to make progress in Bhakti like Sukadeva a lot quicker than someone who's influenced by the Tamaguna, and first has to have things cleared away and so forth. So anyway, the point being here is that you have to have a healthy psychological ego, or that's useful, helpful in then pursuing spiritual life. And when we misconstrue the spiritual teachings such that we end up becoming neurotic, because I want to become Krishna conscious, I want to surrender everything, I can't, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling bad about myself, I'm not good enough, and I'm beating myself up and so forth. This is not what's supposed to happen in spiritual life. This is a common phenomenon of the Western world. The Dalai Lama, I read once, he was really surprised to see how many Western students were like preoccupied with self-loathing. He just couldn't understand it. It didn't register with him. So the industrial society and modern world, it seems to lend itself to this perhaps a little bit more than times gone by, agrarian-based cultures which were based on an idea that this world is not everything. There's a higher ideal to pursue ultimately and to attain, which isn't the narrative of the modern world today, the dominant narrative of the world today. So it's a long answer to your question, but yes, we should try to apply ourselves as best we can. And when we bump into our conditioning that doesn't allow us to apply ourselves further, we recognize that we have certain limits. You are supposed to be tolerant, to give another way of talking about this, but you're also supposed to create a favorable environment for your practice. So you create a favorable environment for your practice, and in the context of that, you tolerate, not that you leave yourself in a situation that is not favorable and intolerable as a result, but make a favorable situation and then tolerate within that. It's a little bit different from what you're asking about, but yes, patience is a virtue, and this is not going to happen overnight. We just have to, obviously there's a balance. We have to caution ourselves from thinking, this isn't going to happen off the night, so therefore I should put on the brakes and put it in reverse, and that's okay, rather than stepping on the gas. I mean, you have to step on the gas, but you can only go so fast. There are obstacles in the way, and you have to stop, or you're going to bump into that obstacle and it's going to throw you off the road. So you have to deal with them. Sadhana is an art. So you have to learn to work with the mind rather than just going against it. It's going to go against the mind. Well, you're not going to be successful. You have to work with it. You have to give it a little bit of room. The Gita says, for example, that in yoga, one should be yuktahara vihascha. One should be, what does it say? Yuktahara vihascha, in sleep and wake and eating, and have balance, and also with regard to recreation. So you may need to give yourself some recreation. You may need to take a walk along the beach or something, just to deal with your mind, to put it give it a rest, peace, whatever may be the case. So to learn to give and take and make progress incrementally. So when you run into obstacles, when you know that you didn't, that your ability to commit in a certain circumstance was less than ideal, well, that's who you are. That's where you are right now. No reason to beat yourself up about it, but now you have a good reading. Okay, this is my problem or an issue with me. And so there's more than one way to enter the house. You can go through the door, you can go through the window, you can go through the back door, you can go through the chimney. You have to be a little artful, a little skillful in sadhana, but don't beat yourself up, become neurotic, and get yourself in a position of psychological ego imbalance. That's not going to help you to progress. I hope that helps.
And I think that Bhakti Lata had a follow-up question
Okay.
in the chat. So her question is, how do we get over the self-loathing so we can get back where we need to be? Sometimes in the throes of depression / self-loathing, it's hard to have the motivation for anything.
Yeah, these are difficult times in human society that aren't particularly conducive for spiritual practice, I would say. And so I empathize with you in the fact that you and many others are confronted with that. But I think that one thing that's worth considering is that if we look at the Bhagavatam, there are paradigmatic figures in the Bhagavatam who are great devotees. Gaurangi Priya, who's out there in your area in North Carolina, told me once that she was putting together a collection of the things that happened to great devotees, the adversities that they had to face, and so forth. And she was like surprised, like, wow, it's not all, roses and lotuses here, if you want to smell the rose, you might get pricked by the thorn. It's possible. And she was really surprised that so many great devotees and so many problems that they were put in. So I think we can look, to those examples. If we have good association, we're regularly hearing and chanting, and they can be an inspiration to us in our life, in as much as when our own difficulties, we can share them or compare them with others. We get some kind of like community support. Like, okay, if I'm suffering from something and I find somebody else is suffering from the same thing, it lightens my burden a little bit, right? So this is one way in which you can lighten the burden, by sharing it, so to speak, with and exchanging notes with, here's my problem. It's really bad. Let's talk to the Pandavas. And then I look at their problem. Their house was burned. They were exiled. They did nothing wrong whatsoever, and so on. And and we can bond with them, these great Mahajans, great souls, in the midst of our own, difficulties, with the fact that they had difficulties, and get some strength from them. This is one thing I would recommend, but it requires familiarity with the texts, reading them, so on and so forth, hearing from other devotees, the narrative. Look at Prahlad's situation, his own father. We may have had a father that was dysfunctional and did one thing or another to us, or didn't do one thing or another that should have been done. And what about Prahlad? So we're not alone. The point is, sometimes we feel alone in our difficulties, but we, in the bigger picture, amongst devotees and in the community of devotees, in the lila-seva that we want to enter, you can imagine what is the measure of their compassion for us. They have experiences that even exceed ours in terms of obstacles and difficulties and so forth. So these are real people, real figures. These are manifestations of Krishna's internal energy, Swarup Shakti. We should count on the compassionate and empathetic nature of the Swarup Shakti, and not feel alone in our difficulties. Beyond that, of course, we have our contemporary devotees with whom we can share our notes, if you will, my problems and your problems. And this is a typical way in which we can get some relief and lighten the burden, but it's a burden that at the same time we think we have to go through. And why? One day it'll all come clear. This all happened to me for this reason, this reason, this reason. It all makes sense. And right now, it doesn't always make sense, but one day it will all come to you like a whole painting. This and all, let's say, all makes sense to you. So hang on. All right, we're with you. We love you. Bhakti Lata Dasi.
Thank you.
So with that, we're out of time. We have a note here from Dr. Vamsidhari, I see. He's a psychologist. There is a psychological phenomenon, he says, called spiritual bypass, meaning that one uses spiritual practice in the service of one's neurosis.
Bypass.
He meant bypass. A spiritual bypass, meaning that one uses spiritual practice in the service of one's neurosis, sometimes to avoid one's psychological issues, sometimes just transferring one's issues into the spiritual practice. Take care of, it must be one's own emotional life. Taking care of one's own emotional life will improve the practice. Yep, likely. Mercy, compassion, love is in bhakti. Self-loathing and all these other things are not part of it. Yes, we have limits and have to function within them. Listen to Guru Maharaj. That is what mercy sounds like. Hold on to that, he says. Well said from a doctor. Got a prescription for the day, a psychological prescription for the day. We're very thankful for that. So nice to be with you all, and I hope to be with you again next week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jai. So yeah, I'll make some announcements. Those were nice questions. They're always nice questions. Okay, let's go to the classes and announcements. Okay, so on Mondays, Padmanabha Swami is giving classes on Brahma Gita, the Song of the Bumblebee. On Tuesdays, Krishangi is giving classes. When in doubt, read chapter 2. And then Dulal is giving classes on Wednesday on Krishna Sandarbha. And then Archana is doing her interviews, the beauty and messiness of a sadhaka's journey. And then on Fridays, Guru Nishta is giving class, the intentional sadhaka, focusing on making practice. And then on Saturdays, Mohini is giving class, exploring the mercy of Sri Nityananda through song and shastra. And is Padmanabha Swami still doing something earlier on Thursdays? Is that a thing? It's hard for me to keep up with everything.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I think that's happening at 8 a.m. our time, right?
Yeah, I think it's 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
EDT.
EDT, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
9 a.m. I'm sorry, 9 a.m.
It's 9 a.m.
Yeah, I think where you are, it's 9 a.m., but in North Carolina, it's
8 a.m. And
Yeah,
you just kind of
right.
figure out the time.
It's 8
Okay.
a.m. for sure.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah, about on this, at this time. Okay. Thanks for filling in that gap. It's not, I don't think that, oh, it is in the announcement. It is in the announcement. I just didn't go down. Sorry, I have trouble keeping up with everything. It's a lot to keep up with. But I'm grateful it's happening. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. Maybe hang on to them, Chaitanya Charan and Eric. So yeah, okay, I'll see you all soon. Haribo, thanks.